Hey, what's up guys? This lesson is for section 04, which is adding and subtracting rational numbers. Now with rational numbers, what we are going to do is look into fractions. I know that whole number is a rational number, integer is a rational number, but for this specific lesson, we are looking at fractions on how to add and subtract fractions. So I give you guys some rules that you guys can follow in order to add or subtract fractions, and you have to pay attention, especially with the denominator of the fraction. And we'll talk about denominator and numerator. You also have to know the parts of a fraction. So let's go ahead and look at those different parts or different steps that you guys need to take. So step number one, it says here that you want to find the lowest common denominator, LCD, when you guys are adding or subtracting fractions. So I'm going to highlight that LCD because it's important that you guys remember lowest common denominator. So we'll talk about that, lowest common denominator. Number two, you guys are going to multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number. And this is because when we are looking for the lowest common denominator and we have to multiply the bottom of the fraction, whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do it to the top of the fraction. So you have to multiply by the same number on the top and the bottom of the fraction. Number three says, follow the rules for adding and subtracting integers, and you are going to keep the denominator. This section is about adding and subtracting. The next section will be about multiplying and dividing. Students get confused when they are adding, subtracting, or if they are multiplying, dividing. Here, when you guys are adding or subtracting, you will keep the same denominator. So let me underline that so you guys can remember, you keep the denominator. And number four, you guys always reduce your answer if you can. Sometimes you cannot, sometimes you can. But we always want the simplest form when we are going to when we actually add or subtract fractions. So let's do some examples where you guys add or subtract. And for the first examples, I'm just going to keep the same denominator so you guys can see how you add and how you keep the denominator. But after that, I'm going to give you guys fractions with different denominators, and then we can start following the rules that I give you guys here. There's 4 rules. You guys have to look into those rules. So let's try some examples. I know that this is not example number 1, it is example number 2, but it's about adding fractions where you guys have the same denominator. Now, what is the denominator? What is the numerator? So let's go ahead and look at the first example that I have. I have 2 fractions and I'm adding. You guys have 3 over 5 plus 7 over 5. So the bottom of the fraction is called denominator. So this is denominator. The top of the fraction is the numerator. Numerator is the top. So denominator, numerator. When you guys are adding and subtracting, and I know I am adding here because I have a plus in between. I have 3 over 5, and this fraction is positive because you don't have a sign on the side, but I am adding 7 over 5. So sometimes you have to add, sometimes you have to subtract. The denominator, the bottom of the fraction, they have the same number, 5 and 5. So that means that we do have the same denominator. All you do when you guys have the same denominator, you are going to use the rules of integers on the top, and you guys keep the denominator. So here, since we have the same denominator, I'm going to keep the 5 right there. And on the bottom, sorry, I'm going to keep the 5 on the bottom. And I am going to add the top. 3 plus 7. 3 plus 7, that's going to be 10. Now notice the fraction, 10 over 5. You guys can reduce. If you guys want to reduce, you can divide the top by 5, the bottom by 5. So you guys will have 2 on the top, 10 divided by 5, and on the bottom, 5 divided by 5 is 1. But when you guys have a fraction, you don't need that 1 on the bottom. You actually can write it as 2, as a whole number. So this is my answer. So when you guys are adding or subtracting fractions, that's the first thing you guys need to look for. Do they have the same denominator? If they do not have the same denominator, that means that you guys have to find the lowest common denominator, LCD, in order to add or subtract. And that's what we need when we add or subtract fractions. So the next one, 2 over 7 minus 6 over 7. First of all, look at the denominators. They're the same. So that means that we can start subtracting in this case because I have a minus here. So I'm going to subtract the two fractions because I already have the same denominator. So I'm going to keep the bottom, and here's the fraction line. There's the 7 on the bottom. And on the top, you guys actually have to follow the rules when you guys add or subtract integers. Remember those numbers, negatives and positives? So you really have to pay attention to the numbers. 2 minus 6. 2 minus 6. Let me rewrite that so you guys can see it. 2 minus 6, that's actually negative 4, and you guys keep the denominator. It is negative because when you guys follow the rules, this 2 is positive, this 6 is negative. So when you guys have different signs, you subtract the numbers and keep the sign of the biggest number. So 2 minus 6 is negative 4, and then you guys keep the denominator. Notice here, this cannot be reduced. 7 doesn't go into 4, 4 doesn't go into 7. You guys cannot reduce. So my answer is the fraction negative 4 over 7. Now here, you guys have two negative fractions. There's a minus and there's a minus, negative and negative. So you guys have to be careful when you guys follow the rules, when you guys add or subtract integers. Remember that if the numbers have the same sign, you add the numbers and keep the sign. If the numbers have different signs, you subtract the numbers and you guys keep the sign of the biggest one. And that's what we actually did on the previous example. You subtracted the numbers and you keep the sign of the biggest one. But also check the denominator. Denominator are equal, 9 and 9. So that means that you guys can start adding or subtracting the fraction. So I am going to keep the fraction line. I'm going to keep the 9 on the bottom. That is my denominator. And on the top, I do have a negative 4 minus 5. So let me rewrite that again so you guys can see it better. Negative 4 minus 5 right there. So when you guys do that, I keep my denominator one more time. But on the top, the numbers have the same sign. So you add the numbers and you keep the sign of the numbers. So this is going to be negative, keep the sign, and 4 plus 5 is 9. Now you guys can reduce, you guys can divide. Negative 9 divided by 9, well, you guys can have a negative 1. And it's negative because you guys have 1 negative. So there's my 1 negative, and 9 divided by 9 is 1. So now let's look at fractions when they do not have the same denominator. So this is where students get confused. Remember, keep in mind, memorize that you need the same denominator when you guys are adding or subtracting fractions. Only when you add or subtract. Next lesson will be about multiplying and dividing, and you guys will see that you don't need a common denominator when you multiply or divide. But right now we're adding or subtracting. So the first example, it says 1/2 plus 2/3. Okay, so first of all, my denominators are not the same. I need to find the lowest common denominator. So what is the lowest common and what is a lowest common denominator? Lowest common denominator is a number that 2 and 3, and this is a multiple of 2, multiple of 3, that they have in common. So what do I mean? You guys need to start doing a list of the two multiples of 2's and multiples of 3's, okay? So I'm going to do that on the bottom, and you actually don't need, really need to do this if you guys already know how to find the lowest common denominator. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a list of multiples of 2's. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So all of those numbers can be divisible, are divisible by 2. You guys can divide by 2. And you guys can keep going. 14, I'm going to put dot, 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 because there's more, there's more, there's more. But now you guys are going to look at the 3. So what are the multiples of 3's? There's a 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and 18. Keep going, going, and going, and going, okay? So notice, all of these numbers in blue are divisible by 3. Those are the multiples of 3's. So you want to find the lowest number lowest number that you can find in this list that they have in common. So they don't have in common a 2 or 3. They don't have in common a 4, but they do have in common a 6. So this 6 is my lowest common multiple. Now in a fraction, we're going to say lowest common denominator. But I want you guys to see something else. You see the 12 here and the 12 over here? You can say, okay, well, what about the 12? Well, the 12 is a common denominator, but it's not the lowest. Can you use 12? Yes, you can, but it's going to make your life a lot complicated. To make your life a lot easier, use the lowest. LCD, lowest common denominator. So I'm going to put on the side here, LCD. So the next step, you guys, you need to make the 2 into a 6 because that is the lowest common denominator. And actually, let me put the number 6 here so you guys know LCD is 6. You guys need to make the 2 a 6 and you guys need to make that 3 into a 6. The way you guys do this, I can multiply 2 by 3. 2 times 3 is 6. And the 3 I can multiply by 2. 3 times 2 is 6. So I'm going to multiply the bottom by 3, and I'm going to multiply the 2, I multiply by 3, and this 3 I multiply by 2. So whatever you do to the bottom of the fraction, you also have to do it to the top. So the top, if you multiply the first fraction by 3 on the bottom, you also have to multiply by 3 on the top. That second fraction, you multiply the bottom by 2, so you multiply the top by 2. So when you guys do all this work, I know this is a lot of work, guys, but I'm going to put the plus here. You guys have to do this when you add or subtract. So the bottom, you guys can multiply 3 times 2. 3 times 2 is 6. The top, 3 times 1, that's 3. The next fraction, 3 times 2 is 6. And the top, 2 times 2 is 4. Right there. So look at the denominators now. The denominators, they have the lowest common denominator. They're equal. So we are ready to add, okay? Or maybe subtract if you guys are subtracting fractions. So I'm going to put an equal sign over here. I'm going to keep my denominator, there's a 6. And I'm going to add 3 plus 4. 3 plus 4, that is 7. So you guys have 7 over 6. Now let me explain in algebra, or fractions in algebra. In algebra 1, we keep fractions as in improper fractions. So what I mean is the top number can be bigger than the bottom number. That's fine. In algebra 1, algebra 2, we use improper fractions for our answer. Make sure you guys reduce, if you can, reduce the fractions, but you guys can keep it as improper fractions. In elementary, they are big fan teachers to turn fractions or improper fractions into mixed numbers. You guys can do that, but you don't need to in algebra 1. I'm going to tell you guys the mixed number for this one, okay? The mixed number for this, 7 over 6, is equal to 1 and 1/6. Why is it a mixed number? Because you have a whole number, 1, and you have a fraction. Mixed number. Whole number and a fraction. So this here, the one in red, no, you guys don't need it in algebra. You guys can keep it as an improper fraction. So you don't need, one more time, you don't need this answer in my class. You don't need it. It's okay if you put it, but you don't need it. You guys have the improper fraction. Now the next one is the same thing. If you notice the denominators, they're not the same, 3 and 8. So you really have to find the lowest common denominator, and you have to make those numbers equal. So you have to multiply the 3 by a number, the 8 by a number, and whatever you do to the bottom, you do it to the side. So here on the bottom, I'm going to put that list of multiples so you guys can see the lowest common multiple or the lowest common denominator. So you guys see that list here for the 3s, 3, 6, 9, 12, and it keeps going. And then for the 8 is 8, 16, 24, and it keeps going. I stop here, but obviously there's more. There's many more multiples of 8. There's many more multiples of 3s. But we want to find the lowest common. So once you guys look for the common number, the lowest one or the first one they have in common is the 24. So here and here, both of them have a 24. So I'm going to put a box around the 24 and this 24, and that is my lowest common denominator, LCD, which is 24. So I have to go back and I have to think about what do I have to multiply 3 by to get 24, and what do I have to multiply the 8 by to get 24. So looking at the 3, you have to multiply by 8 to make that 24. What I do to the bottom, you have to do it to the top. So you multiply by 8. And the 8 on this side, this one here, well, you have to multiply that by 3. So whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do it to the top. Now when you multiply, I'm going to put the equal fraction line plus fraction line. On the bottom, I get 24. 8 times 3 is 24. 8 times 3 is 24 over here. Now the top, you really have to be careful with the signs because this negative goes with the 1, not the 3. This is going to go to the 1. So I'm going to put an arrow, circle this, and go over here. So that's going to be your negative 1. Okay, this will stay positive. 8 times 3 is positive 24. But the negative 1 times the 8, that's going to be negative 8. And over here, you guys have a positive plus. I already have the plus there. 3 times 3 is 9. So we have on the top, the numerators, negative 8 plus 9. So I'm going to add the top or combine. Make sure you guys follow the rules of integers. I'm going to keep the denominator. So there's a 24 right there, guys. Don't add, don't subtract the denominators. You keep the same one. And on the top, you guys have the negative 8 plus 9. Let me rewrite that again. Negative 8 plus 9. And that's going to equal 1. And you keep the denominator. So negative 8 plus 1 is positive 1. That is my answer. Now, a couple things. You do not have to do this step. If you guys already know negative 8 plus 9, oh, that's 1. That's positive 1. So you guys can jump straight over here. Make sure you guys keep the denominator because we're adding or subtracting the fractions. Second thing is, well, you guys don't have to do this every time. You do not have to do the list. If you guys already know what is the lowest common denominator, you guys can also skip this step and make sure you guys use the lowest one. Can you guys use a higher one? Yeah, but it's going to make your life a little bit more complicated. So using the lowest common denominator, that's always faster. Now this one, same thing. You guys have different denominators. So I am going to find the lowest common denominator. And I'm going to make my list on the bottom. And you guys see that I already have the LCD here. So I made the list of multiples of 5. I made the list for 4, the multiples of 4, and I found the lowest common denominator or multiple is 20. The first one they have in common, both numbers, is 20. So that means that the 5 on the bottom over here, I have to multiply this by 4. Whatever you do to the bottom, you do it to the top. And you guys multiply the 4 on this side by 5. Whatever you do to the bottom, you do it to the top. So I'm going to have my fraction minus fraction. The bottom is going to be 20. 4 times 5 is 20, and 20 on this side. 4 times 5 is 20. I'm going to multiply these 2 up here, so that's going to be 8. 4 times 2 is 8. I multiply these 2 here. 3 times 5, that is 15. Now you guys have to pay attention because here we have 8 minus 15. So let me rewrite that again so you guys can see it better. I'm going to have my denominator right there, 20. And I rewrite it 8 minus 15. Notice, 8 minus 15. They have different signs. 8 is positive, 15 is negative. The biggest number is 15. So I keep the sign of the biggest number. So this is going to be negative. And then you guys subtract the numbers. 15 minus 8. That is 7. And you guys keep your denominator. So check that you cannot reduce the fractions. 7 and 20 you guys cannot reduce. If you guys are able to reduce, you have to, but right now we don't have to. So my answer will be right here, negative 7 over 20. So for these examples, I'm going to show you guys how to use a calculator or scientific calculator online. It's called Desmos. You guys can see the name up here, desmos.com. That is a free website. You can also download the app to your phone. And it does fractions. It does everything scientific calculator does, plus a graphing calculator. But we're not graphing. We are just adding, subtracting fractions. So when you guys use Desmos, the same fractions you guys see here, you are going to input into the boxes of the rectangles in Desmos, and that's going to add or subtract the fractions. Now it's going to give you guys a decimal number, so you guys just have to convert it into a fraction, and it has a function in that website, in that Desmos calculator, so you can convert it into a fraction. So I'm going to show you guys, before I actually do the ones on the screen, I'm just going to show you a few that I have here. So I'm going to add 1/2. So you put 1 divided by 2. I'm going to move the cursor to the right. There's a cursor. And I'm going to put minus 7/3. So notice that the answer is in decimal form, negative 1.83333. So that is a rational number. In the blue section, in the blue under the 1, you guys can press the little boxes that looks like a fraction. So I'm going to press on that. You guys notice those boxes turn white. So the answer turned into a fraction, negative 11/6. You guys can turn it back to a decimal just by pressing that fraction in the blue box. It's white right now. It's blue right now. It's white right now. So you guys can use this Desmos to convert into a fraction. Now, if the actual decimal is irrational, it's not going to convert it into a fraction, because irrational numbers, you cannot write those in as a fraction. So I'm going to delete this one here, and I'm going to do the one you guys see on the left side. If you guys see parentheses, make sure you guys use parentheses exactly the same way you guys see the problem. That's what you are going to put in Desmos. So I'm going to open parentheses. I put the minus, which is negative 1 divided by 2. I move the cursor. I close the parentheses. Make sure that you guys open and close parentheses, because that makes a difference. I put the plus right there. 2 divided by 5. It's a decimal, but I'm going to make it into a fraction. So my fraction is negative 1/10. So I go here. This equals negative 1/10. Notice that my denominators right now is 2 and 5, but the lowest common denominator is 10. So this is my answer. You guys can use Desmos to help you find the answer. So I'm going to go to the next one. The next one, you guys have 1 divided by 3. Move the cursor, so you guys move the minus on the right side. Open parentheses, and there's a negative, and you guys have a 5 divided by 4. Move the cursor, close parentheses. Again, it's a decimal. Let me turn that into a fraction. So my fraction is 19/12. And the last one you have a whole number minus a fraction. Mathematically, if you do this by hand, no calculator, you actually have to convert this whole number into a fraction. You just have to put a 1 under that fraction, okay? But if you use a calculator, you don't have to make it a fraction, because the calculator will do that. When it actually computes, finds the answer, it will make it into a fraction, and it's going to subtract the fractions. So that 1, I'm just going to erase it because we don't need it. Erase, erase. But I am going to use the calculator, Desmos, and I'm going to put 3 minus 11 divided by 9. And you notice that I didn't put 11 on the top. So I'm going to move the cursor. I'm going to delete 11 divided by 9. So you guys can delete, you guys can go back, you guys can move the cursor. There's the decimal, but my fraction form is 16. So this equals 16/9. Once again, the calculator, what it does, it makes a 3 into a fraction. It finds the lowest common denominator, and then it subtracts the fractions. So that's doing it by hand. But with the calculator, you guys can use Desmos. You guys can use a different calculator, scientific calculator, and it will do the work for you. So this technology, this tool, the Desmos calculator, is really powerful. You guys can use it to add or subtract fractions, but you also need to understand what is the concept of adding and subtracting fractions. So I am done with this lesson, guys. Make sure you guys practice. Make sure you guys always do your practice work so you guys know how to use a calculator, Desmos, or any scientific calculator. And also, you practice so you understand how to do the problems, how to solve for those problems. If you guys like my videos, you guys can click that like button. You guys can also subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you guys later.